So, hey, what are your thoughts on Assassin's Creed Black Flag? This game came out 11 years ago, about.
Yeah, it was the fall of 2013,
Yeah,
just
yeah.
before the PlayStation 4 and the Xbox One consoles launched in the first place. I was, that's right when I was working at GameStop for just a little bit of time there.
Yeah.
It's funny they even, I mean, it's a weird thing that business would do where you could like if you worked there, you could take a copy home, right? Almost like rent it out or check it out.
Mm,
But it was the new copies of the games, and then they'd put them back on the shelf and sell them as new.
mm.
So just a little inside thing for people out there about that. Again, just another one of the many things about GameStop that you might not be a big fan of. But no, did you play this one back in the day yourself as well?
No, I did not.
Okay. Well, this one is. So it was interesting. This franchise was in a weird place when this game came out because people, you know, I think responded pretty positively to the first one, very positively to the second one. Loved the Italian setting with Ezio and all that. And then I'd say pretty positive to Brotherhood, somewhat lukewarm on Revelations. And I think people started to, right around there, we're starting to feel fatigued by this franchise. Like, oh, you're putting one of these out every year at this point. It's starting to get to be a little too much. And people were also like, hey, let's move on from Ezio. All right. You've given this guy 3 games. Let's move on to a new time period. And then 3 came out, which was the American Revolution. And that game was kind of a huge disappointment by most metrics. But it did do one thing that I think most people found pretty memorable. And there was this very kind of cordoned off little section of the game it was kind of a side mission thing, but they introduced this idea of like ship combat. So you'd go and select a mission, and then it just give you this very small sequence. But then that would only be a taste of things to come with the following game, which is Black Flag. And for being kind of a franchise that people were very fatigued and just felt like they'd had too much of, this game came in and completely revitalized the whole series, changing it up to such a degree. There's a lot of gameplay similarities in terms of the melee combat when you're walking around just as the person fighting people, running around it takes place in the Caribbean, right? So Havana, Nassau, some of these places. And you get some of the typical Assassin's Creed gameplay, tailing people from far away, trying not to let them see you, sneaking up, doing your assassinations. And that stuff's all well and good. But this game makes its mark with the ship combat. The open world here is the high seas themselves. And you have your own ship, a very sizable amount of upgrades that you can mess around with, and you can just go pirating. You have so much freedom to move around this world. And when I talk about, recently, I'm very kind of fatigued by open world games and how big and long they can be. This game is the size of game I'm thinking of when I think, could open world games just be here? This is you want to do everything here. It could take you up to 60 hours, and that's not a small amount of time, certainly. But if you want to just play the story, you're looking at like maybe 15 hours. So there's this much nicer sense of pacing and progression that you can go through here. Now I just played this again, revisited it for the first time in 10 years. I landed at about 30, somewhere in like 37, 38 hours, just under 40 for me. So I explored a good amount of this going back to it. And it just reminds me of a time when I was actually really into this franchise. It used to be, one of my favorites, and today it's kind of a up and down thing. But a couple just interesting things I noticed as far as the story here. You're playing as this character that is not an assassin. That's another thing that made this game kind of such a pleasant shift from the previous entries. You're not really an assassin here. You're playing as a pirate who kills an assassin, steals his uniform, and is kind of messing with both the Templars and the assassins throughout the story. Yeah, you might land a little more with the allegiance on the perceived good guys of the series by the end of the whole thing. But you really kind of feel like this was the first time in the whole franchise where it felt like you were playing as a third party to this conflict that all these games are centered around. But fun thing, I don't know if people will remember this, but this main character you're playing as Edward Kenway, this pirate, is voiced by Matt Ryan, who would go on to play Constantine for
Mm.
well, I guess the next 10 years. He's still playing Constantine in animated features. He's popping up in the Crisis on Infinite Earths animated movies that are coming out right now. And I think the Constantine, the live action like NBC show, I want to say that was 2014. So it was only a year after this game. But he's been he was this character, and he's been launched into DC fame for a whole decade at this point. And another casting I want to point out too, because it's about to be a big one. But you interact with a whole bunch of different like historical figures here, right? Assassin's Creed has always played this kind of towed this line between we're going to include a bunch of real history and historical people, but we're going to play around with them and kind of create this fictional narrative around these things. So again, anybody complaining about Shadows, just go play any of the other games and compare it to real history, and it's not going to be a 1-to-1 for any of them. But you interact with, Blackbeard, right? Edward Teach, Jack Rackham, who famously actually created the Skull and Bones flag. He was the real pirate attributed to that creation. And then Charles Vane, who was another historical pirate, and Ralph Ineson, who's going to be Galactian, popped up as Charles Vane in here, which I was like, oh wow, I didn't remember that at all from playing this 10 years ago. So that was just another fun little actor thing. But yeah, the story here is, I think it's pretty interesting. You kill an assassin, you steal his uniform, you start to get wrapped up and exposed to this conflict. And I guess I should mention this character is the grandfather of the main character from the third game. Yeah, that's the character model there. And I guess you see the character. A lot of these characters popped up in that Black Sail series. I see images from that popping up there as well.
Yep.
Um, but I would compare it to that because that show also had a lot of real people that were in the story, but again, it took a very fictional story and kind of wrapped it around these historical figures. But yeah, so you get involved in this whole conflict, and the whole thing, these games always have some sort of MacGuffin or magic item, right? The Apple of Eden in the first three, but here it's actually a guy that is the MacGuffin. It is someone who is born. They call him a sage in the game. Someone with this ability to tap into some one of these magic artifacts from this precursor civilization, and it's this like gigantic. I'm trying to think of the best way to describe it, but it's kind of like a looking glass that you'd use to spot other ships on a pirate ship, but one that's hidden away and you could use to spy on anyone, kind of like a modern piece of spy technology. And so it's one of the leftover artifacts from this precursor race, these magical beings. Again, look at that and tell me Shadows is too historically inaccurate for you. But yeah, and so it's kind of all about preventing, to some degree, either side from having full control over this technology. I mean, imagine if some corporation in the time of the golden age of piracy had like, NSA style spyware. They'd be unstoppable, right? As far as just political manipulations go. Um, yeah, that's a good chunk of what I loved about this the game. I will say, returning to it, there's a little bit of jankiness to certain elements of the gameplay. I think mostly when you're running around on foot, there are some issues. Some big thing I think maybe is even still an issue in Assassin's Creed games is you try and wall run, grab onto something, right, climb up a building, and you'll just grab onto the complete wrong thing and not at all what you're going for. Uh, there's some of the character animation, like the faces. Even at the time, I remember thinking like it's okay, but it's kind of got that Ubisoft face problem where again, not necessarily bad, but they look a little stiff and inexpressive. Uh, Despite like the character models being pretty detailed, but just the facial animations are a little stiff. But again, that's small stuff. I wouldn't say that's too big of an anything that really hindered my enjoyment of this. Um, I would say the ship combat is what shines here. It's so fun to run around, or not run around, but sail around and take on these other ships, engage in these battles. There's all sorts of just completely not required things you can do here. There's like legendary ships. There's small islands you can sail to, discover like secret items on. There's so many things to discover in this open world. It's just yeah, it reminds me of how good Assassin's Creed can be.
Mm, okay. Um, yeah. So this game came out, you said 11 years ago, over a decade ago there. So it says here about takes around 20 hours to complete the main story, but it can take up to 60 hours to complete everything in the game if you so choose, if you want to 100% it. So you can do that. And Assassin's Creed Black Flag received critical acclaim and became one of the best-selling games of 2013, with over 11 million copies sold as of 2014. Critics praised the open world gameplay, improved naval combat, side quest graphics, narrative characters, and pirate theme there. So he says it's kind of a little janky, a little the running, a little the kind of traversing around the area. The
I
won't.
think it's yeah, I think it's a thing that's it's present in I think consistently in a lot of the older Assassin's Creed games, and I think it's partially it's a product of them being 10 plus years old. And then but even at the time, like I said, there were things where it's like I'm gonna run up this building, and then it's like oh no, he's grabbing onto this ledge like completely the opposite direction that I was trying to go. And that's something I remember dealing with that back in the day and dealing with it again now. So it's not like a huge slight against the game. It's just a little bit of it. I think my biggest criticism is I think this is the game where, and considering they're still putting out Assassin's Creed games today, this was relatively early in the franchise. So this I think really says something. But this was the game where it really became apparent that it was the modern day portion of this franchise just felt completely pointless. In three, it was kind of this conclusion that they'd been building up to with the present day aspect, because Assassin's Creed has always had this element of you're playing as this character in modern day. In the original couple games, it was Desmond, voiced by Nolan North of Nathan Drake and Deadpool fame, which we just recently talked about. Um, and you were like kidnapped by this company that was like modern day Templars. They put you into the machine to read your genetic memory, and you like relived the life of your ancestors, right? And in the third game, they conclude that story, in my opinion, in a way that is very poor, and it makes it feel like there was no real reason to have the modern day element at all. It could have easily just been a historical story. But of course, I guess that ties into the precursor race and like the magic artifact part. Um, but they really conclude that element of things in three. So when you get into Black Flag, it's like it's first person and you're like an intern doing video game quality testing at this corporation that's using the Animus to look into people. It feels so contrived to still have this present day part in the game, and it's just not interesting. You're playing as a completely nameless character. You interact with a couple office workers and then like a hacker. None of it's particularly interesting or engaging, at least in my opinion. And to this day, I mean, I played Assassin's Creed Valhalla. Not a huge fan of it, but I played it all the way to the end, and they're still coming up with ways to force this present day storyline in here and to try and find ways to extend it. And so that's something that, like, luckily you don't spend a ton of time on. Like the majority of the game, you're in the Caribbean, you're sailing on your ship, you're playing as pirates. But every once in a while, the game is like forces you to go back out and do some story sequence stuff in the present day, walking around with a clipboard. And I could not care less about that part of this. And it does hurt the game to have that there, even though it's not present through a huge amount of it. Just the way that it takes you out of the game world, it just takes you out of the game so much. And to this day, like there's a cliffhanger in this game, which being 11 years old, I feel like we could talk spoilers here. But if you haven't played it, I guess here's your spoiler warning. But you at the end of three, Desmond like saves the world from a solar flare, and he like unleashes one of these precursor magic beings back into the present day, right? Is Juno, like right, one of the Roman gods. And in this game, it's like Juno is like in the computer system of this company. And then this cliffhanger where in the present day you like you do something and you communicate with her and she brings this like prophecy of doom. And I'm like, someone could correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure in all the Assassin's Creed games that have come since Black Flag, and all of them having had like a present day element to their story, I'm pretty confident that that cliffhanger has never had a continuation or resolution in the 11 years since this game came out. So again, it just makes me go and question what the point of having these present day sequences are, because it
Mm.
really doesn't feel like there is one.
So you see the weaker element is all of the when they force you to go back to the present day, a lot of when they
That's by far the weakest part.
okay. Um, and the character, Edward, Kenway, there, how does he compare to the other, lead main characters of the Assassin's Creed franchise there?
Personally, for me, he's probably my third favorite out of all of them. I do think he's got a lot more going on than, say, like Connor in the third one, who I found just to be very boring, or Altair in the very first game. This is a bit stoic. I'm not even going to name all of them because there's too many. But between like
I've
Ezio,
oh, yeah.
oh, sorry.
Yeah, I was gonna say I think Ezio is considered the best one, right?
Yeah, Ezio is very charismatic. He's very likable. You get to follow his story from very early in life. Really see kind of his whole life play out from like youth to old age. And I think, yeah, people have a very strong affinity for that character. And then number two, I'd say, is Bayek from Origins. That's a great character. He's the last of the Magi in Egypt in that game, and he's got a whole vengeful quest against this cult that would eventually become the Templars because they performed like a human sacrifice on his son. And that voice actor that played Bayek would go on to be the kind of story creator and head of development on Tales of Kenzara Zao, which is maybe still my game of the year so far this year. Um, he's just a fantastic actor, brought a lot to that character. But I'd say Edward Kenway here easily goes up there as like the next best one out of those three. He's got a lot of charm. He's got a lot of charisma. I mean, Matt Ryan, you can really tell it's him when you listen to it. Like if you've seen the Constantine, any of his performances, Constantine, I think his voice is very recognizable now, at
Mhm.
least if you're familiar with that character. And there's a charisma. He brings a similar charisma that he brings to the Constantine character, right? He's a pirate. He's kind of dirty. He doesn't necessarily play by the kind of moralistic heroic rules that you expect from someone like Ezio, who's very honorable and always about doing the right thing. Um, Edward Kenway is he's a much more he's a pirate, right? He's down to break the rules and kind of do the bad things sometimes, and that's part of why in this game, you kill an assassin and get the uniform, you steal it. You're not inducted through some ceremony into this organization. Like you screw them over like right off the bat. You're messing with them. You mess with their plans and sabotage them even a couple times. And so it's nice to also just have a character in this franchise that's not a 100% like a goody two shoes. You get a little bit of a more of a I don't know chaotic good. I would say maybe is the best way to describe him.
What would be your final thoughts rating for Assassin's Creed Black Flag?
Honestly, I'm gonna give this a peek. Some of the things I'm criticizing are due to its age, right? Like some janky mechanics here. But I think from the gameplay to the story to the character himself, I think being pretty charming and likable and investing in the narrative of to a really strong supporting cast. I didn't recognize too many in the way of the other actors here, but between at least Matt Ryan and Ralph Ineson as Charles Bane, and the voices of Blackbeard and Jack Rackham, you have some strong performances here. You get a lot of great interaction between pirates trying to form their own nation on Nassau and them stabbing each other in the back and the kind of political situation that arrives from a pirate nation trying to be formed. And as much as I don't like the present day element of the story, I think they keep it to enough of a minimum that it's only going to hurt the game a little bit, not totally tear it down. And I think for all its strengths, this game it shows a lot of how to do an open world game right. And I think a lot of modern games including the Assassin's Creed franchise, could look to this and learn or relearn some things about how to design an open world game that's not going to take hundreds of hours to play.
Mhm. So, you kinda came in around a high tune in peak or
Yeah, I'd give it like a peak, maybe even like a low peak, but I'd say I'm right around a peak.
okay. So peak, yeah. People still check it out? I mean, even after all these years, this game is still pretty good to play.
Yeah,
Uh,
I mean, and also, I mean, you're gonna find it for $10 at its most expensive. I think typically on a lot of these services, it's an old game, goes on sale every time there's a sale. So I've seen it for like $5 on not that infrequently. So it's the barrier to entry, very small. I think it's definitely one of the best in this franchise.
mm. So I see it on Amazon right now, it's $22, 22.15
22.
on
That's for a
there.
physical copy.
Physical copy of it, but it might be cheaper if you do digital
Yeah,
there.
I see it on sale for like $5 on the like PlayStation Store. So, I mean, if you just wait for a holiday sale, snatch that game up real cheap. I don't know what its standard like not on sale price is, but I can't imagine it's very expensive just because of its
Uh,
age.
yeah, I see the digital activation code here, yeah, is 8.35 if you want the digital
Okay, yeah,
activation.
that's nothing.
Yeah, and I don't know, they might put it on sale there. I don't know, they might do some special deal with all the Assassin's Creed games since the new one's coming out. So maybe they want people to go and buy the older ones, so they might do that. So very nice. And Matt Ryan is actually got the same demographic as the character he's playing, Edward Kenway. He is Welsh, so it's the same thing there. Um, and the people who did the game, they heard him because originally they were kind of just going to do a generic British accent with him. You know what I mean? They're like, "Oh, we'll just do a British accent," but hearing his natural Welsh accent, they decided just to have him go with that and changed the character's backstory to match the backstory of the actual actor himself.
I did
Uh,
not know that. That's very cool.
so yeah,